In 1949, a man in a holler outside Hazard, Kentucky, walked home from the mine with coal dust ground into the creases of his hands. 3 things were wrong when he got there. The pump on the porch had quit drawing. The cabin door had swelled tight in the August damp. The handle on his only axe had split clean through at the head. He fixed all 3 before the lamp was lit. A strip of belt leather, a candle stub from the drawer, a hickory wedge he shaped with the knife in his pocket. 40 minutes, start to finish. He did not look anything up. He did not send for anyone. There was no one to send for, and no money to send if there had been. The man who owns that same land today called a well company for the pump. They charged him $300 and told him the part was on order. He was no old-timer showing off. He was a man who lived where help did not come. In the hills, you fixed what broke because the nearest repairman was a day's travel and a week's wages away. Self-reliance was not a virtue up there. It was the rent you paid to stay alive on hard ground. That knowledge did not fade because it stopped working. It worked better than anything that replaced it. It was buried, quietly, deliberately, by an industry that learned it could sell you the thing your grandfather did for pennies. Number 19 reseats a stovepipe that leaked smoke into a kitchen for 2 winters straight with a pair of pliers and 3 small screws. Number 11 held a barn gate square for 40 years on 1 wire and 1 turn of a wrench. And number 4, the leak every man in the hills stopped before the first frost, now runs $400 when you call a plumber. He stopped it permanently, in 20 minutes, with hemp fiber and a brush. These 25 repairs were never about saving money. They were about never standing at the mercy of a man with a truck and an invoice. Hit subscribe and let us count down the 25 lost mountain repairs every rural family once depended on, the ones they hoped you would never learn. Number 25, quieting a screaming hinge with rendered tallow. You tapped the pin up out of the hinge with a nail and a light hammer. You smeared it with tallow saved from the last hog. You tapped it back down into the barrel. The screaming stopped permanently. A cabin had 100 hinges and no oil can to spare, but there was always grease from the kitchen. Dry metal dragging on dry metal makes the noise. A thin film of fat ends it. Not a new hinge. A handful of what was already rendered. Number 24, freeing a stuck window with a tallow candle. You ran a plain candle hard down both sash channels until the wax worked into the grain. The window slid free in your hand. Mountain humidity swells a sash shut every July. By August, it was sealed in the frame like it had been nailed. The wax broke the bind in under a minute, for pennies. The candles were already in the drawer. The window was not broken, it was swollen tight. Those are 2 different problems. He knew which one he had. Number 23, patching a leaking galvanized bucket with a single bolt. You cleaned the rust from around the pinhole. You slipped a small bolt through with a rubber washer pressed on each side. You drew the nut down until both washers spread flat and sealed. A bucket carried water up from the spring 4 times a day. You did not throw one out over a hole the size of a pin. A nickel of hardware bought another 5 years. The bucket had a hole. It did not need a funeral. He told the difference. Number 22, rehandling a broken axe with a hickory wedge. You knocked the old handle stub out of the head and cleaned the eye. You shaped a new hickory handle to fit, seated the head hard, and drove a wooden wedge into the kerf until the eye swelled tight. A small steel wedge crossed it to lock it forever. Cut the kerf for that wedge before you seat the head 2/3 down the eye. A wedge driven into uncut wood splits the new handle inside a week. The head was good iron and would outlive 3 men. The handle was the only part that ever died. The steel was sound. The wood had failed. He replaced the wood. Number 21, putting an edge back on an axe with a whetstone. You wet the stone with creek water. You worked the bevel in small circles, one face, then the other, until a wire edge ran the length of the blade. You stropped it off on your boot leather. Hold the bevel flat at the angle the maker ground it, near 20 degrees. Chase a steeper angle and you round the edge clean off. A dull axe glances off the wood and kills men in the timber. A sharp one bites where you aim it. Every man in the hills knew the edge was the whole tool. He did not curse the axe. He sharpened it.
Before we go on, I made something special for you. A guide for men like us who still believe a man should be able to fix his own home. It's the forgotten handyman secrets, the old-fashioned repair tricks our grandfathers used to fix anything around the house and keep it running for life. But these skills are disappearing fast, and once they're gone for good. Don't pay a repairman ever again. Scan the QR code on screen or click the link below. Go ahead, I'll wait right here.
Number 20, splicing a snapped fence wire with a tight twist. You drew the broken ends together to overlap by a hand's width. You wrapped each loose tail back around the standing wire in tight, climbing turns. The splice held as strong as the unbroken wire. 5 wraps aside, laid tight with fence pliers and no daylight between them. A loose wrap is the one that lets go in January. A broken fence let the stock onto the road by first light. You walked the line every Sunday and mended every break. No new roll of wire, no fence crew from town. The wire snapped. It did not have to be replaced. He rejoined it. Number 19, reseating a leaking stovepipe joint. You let the stove go stone cold first. You pulled the sections apart, scraped the crimped ends clean of creosote, and fit them back so the crimped end pointed down into the stove. 3 sheet metal screws locked each joint solid. The smoke stopped bleeding into the room. A loose stovepipe filled a cabin with smoke and carried fire up the wall. Every winter began with this check. The pipe was sound. The joint had worked loose. He tightened the joint. Number 18, curing a smoking wood stove by fixing the draft. You opened the damper full. You warmed the cold flue first with a twist of burning paper held up the pipe. You cracked a window an inch to give the fire air to pull. The smoke turned and climbed the chimney where it belonged. Burn the paper a full minute before you light the wood. A cold flue holds a plug of heavy air that will not move until you warm it. A stove that smoked back into the room was not broken. It was a cold flue and a starving fire. He gave it the path and the air. The stove drew clean from then on. Number 17, waterproofing boots with tallow and beeswax. You warmed the leather by the stove until it was hot to the touch. You worked melted tallow and beeswax into every seam until the leather drank no more. You buffed it smooth with a rag. Work it hardest at the welt, where the sole meets the upper. That seam is where the wet finds its way in first. 1 pair of boots carried a working man through 3 winters of wet ground. A sealed seam was the line between dry feet and a season of misery. The boots were not worn out. The leather had gone dry. He fed the leather, and they walked another year. Number 16, rebottoming a chair seat with split hickory. You cut the blown-out seat away from the rails. You soaked strips of split hickory until they bent without cracking. Soak them a full hour in warm water until they wrap your thumb without a sound. Dry hickory cracks the moment you pull it tight. You wove them over and under across the frame, pulling each pass tight, and tucked the ends underneath. A kitchen chair seated a family of 8 through 3 meals a day. A broken-through bottom did not retire it. The frame was sound oak. Only the seat had given out. He rewove the seat and set it back at the table. Number 15. Tightening a wobbly chair with a matchstick and glue. You worked the loose rung out of its socket. You coated a matchstick with hide glue and pressed it into the hole alongside the rung. You drove the joint home and bound it with a twisted cord until the glue set overnight. Years of rocking had worn the socket round. The sliver of wood filled what use had worn away. The chair was not finished. It was only loose. He refused to let a sound chair fail. Today, the home repair industry in this country moves more than $600 billion a year. Look hard at what that money buys. A plumber bills $150 an hour to set a $4 seal. A weld company charges $300 for the part a man with a spool of graphite string fixed for 60 cents. You are not paying for materials. You are not even paying for skill. You are paying for one idea, sold hard for 50 years, that your own hands are not qualified to touch your own house. The knowledge was not lost. It was suppressed, one service call at a time, because a man who fixes things for pennies is not a customer. He is a threat. Number 14. Reglazing a broken pane with linseed putty. You cleared the old glass and dried putty from the frame. You brushed the bare wood with linseed oil so it would not starve the new putty. You bedded the glass, pressed glazing compound in with your thumb, and drew it to a clean bevel with one pass of the knife. Glass was cheap. A glazier's trip out to the hills was not. Let the new putty skin over a full week before you paint it. Paint it too soon, and it never sets hard. Your grandfather kept a can of putty and set his own panes. The glass broke. The frame did not. He reset the glass. Number 13. Restringing a broken sash cord. You pried off the stop bead and lifted the lower sash out of its track. You tied new cotton cord to the iron weight down in the pocket of the jamb. You ran it over the pulley at the head of the frame and knotted it into the sash. The window balanced and held again. Tie the weight with a figure-8 knot and singe the tail with a match. A square knot in cotton cord works itself loose inside a season. A double-hung window built before the war outlasted the house around it. The cord was the only part that ever wore. The window was not failing. The cord had rotted. He replaced the cord. Number 12. Rechinking a gap between cabin logs. You raked the failed daubing out of the gap down to sound material. You packed the space behind it with scrap wood as a backing. You troweled fresh lime and sand mortar over the top and struck it smooth to shed rain. A finger-wide gap bled the cabin's heat all winter and let the wind whistle through. The logs were solid chestnut. Only the chinking had cracked away. He filled the gap, and the cabin held its warmth. Number 11. Squaring a sagging gate with wire and a turnbuckle. You ran a wire from the top of the latch side to the bottom of the hinge side. You set a turnbuckle in the run and tightened it until the gate lifted square. A sagging gate is a triangle pulling itself apart. A wire across the long diagonal pulls it back. Snug, not tight. Crank the turnbuckle until the bottom corner just clears the ground, then a half turn more. $2 of hardware, half an hour. The gate did not need rebuilding. It needed a brace. He understood why it sagged, and he answered the why. Number 10. Sealing a drafty door with felt strip. You ran a strip of wool, felt, down the doorstop on all 3 sides until the door shut against a full seal. In a cabin heated by 1 stove, every gap was a hole you paid to heat with wood you split by hand. A dime of felt closed it. The cold came through the gap. The felt stopped the gap. He did not buy a new door from town. He stopped the draft the old one let in. Number 9. Sharpening a cross-cut saw with a file and a set. You clamped the long saw flat in a wooden vise. You jointed the teeth level, then filed each one to a clean point at the proper angle. You set every other tooth out with a hand set, so the cut ran wider than the blade. A sharp cross-cut walked through a green log under its own weight. Set each tooth toward the side it already leans, never against it. Force one the wrong way, and it snaps off down in the cut. A dull one rode and bound, and broke a man's back. The saw was good steel. The edge had gone dull. He restored the edge. There is an old-timer near Mount Airy, North Carolina, past 80 now. He can rehang a gate, repoint a chimney, set a pane, and tell a sick water pump from the sound it makes drawing. He learned all of it at his father's elbow, who learned it at his own. No one has asked him to pass it down. His grandchildren keep a list of phone numbers on the refrigerator, one for every trade in the county. When he is gone, the facts will outlive him in books on a shelf. The instinct will not. Your grandfather carried that instinct. It cannot be taught in a weekend course. It is only ever built by starting. Number 8. Repointing a crumbling stone foundation. You raked the soft, failing mortar out of the joints to sound depth. You dampened the stone so it would not pull water from the mix. You pressed fresh mortar in with a pointing trowel and struck it to shed rain. Failing joints let water into the wall, and mountain frost split it from the inside out. A man with a trowel stopped that in a weekend. The stone was sound. The mortar had failed. He renewed the mortar. Number 7, patching a cracked stone step with hydraulic cement. You chiseled the loose material out, cutting the crack wider at its base so the patch would lock in. You mixed hydraulic cement to a stiff paste and pressed it into the gap. You held it for 3 minutes while it set hard against the damp. Hydraulic cement cures under water rather than failing in it. Keep the patch damp under a wet rag for 3 days. Cement that dries too fast comes back as a crack by spring. The step was cracked. Water freezing in that crack would break it apart. He sealed it before the first frost found it. Number 6. Repacking a leaking hand pump. You backed off the packing nut at the top of the stem. You wound fresh graphite string around the shaft, 3 tight turns clockwise. You drew the nut down snug until the weep at the handle stopped. A pump that wept at the stem was never a failed pump. 3 turns of string, no more. Pack it too thick, and the handle binds, and the leather below it tears. The packing had only dried and shrunk from the shaft. Pennies of string set it right. The pump was sound. The packing was spent. He renewed the string. Number 5, stopping a drip with a leather washer. You shut the water off and pulled the worn stem. You cut a disc of leather from an old belt to match the seat and seated it where the failed washer sat. The drip stopped that minute. Soak the leather disc in warm tallow overnight before you set it. A dry washer cracks the first hard winter. A dripping tap wasted water the family carried from the spring or pumped by hand. No man on hard ground let good water run away. The leather cost nothing, not a plumbing job. A refusal to waste a single drop. Number 4, sealing a pipe joint with hemp and pipe dope. You wire brushed the male threads clean and bright. You wound hemp fiber clockwise around them in tight overlapping turns. You brushed pipe dope over the hemp and threaded the fitting home hard. The joint never wept again. Wind the hemp the way the threads turn, never against them. Against the grain it unravels the moment you tighten the fitting. Hemp and compound made a seal that outlasted the men who set it. Joints sealed this way still hold after 70 years in the ground. He sealed it once, permanently, and never thought of it again. Not a leak managed. A leak ended. Number 3, repacking a leaking shutoff valve. You closed the main and backed the packing nut off the stem. You wound 3 wraps of graphite string clockwise around the stem and drew the nut down snug. The weep at the handle stopped. A leaking valve is almost never a failed valve. The packing inside is only dried and pulled away from the stem. 60 cents of string answered it. He did not replace the valve. He replaced the string wound around its stem. Number 2, replacing a worn seal under the closet. You shut the supply and lifted the fixture off its flange. You scraped the old wax from the horn and the floor until both were clean. You pressed a fresh wax ring onto the horn and lowered the fixture straight onto the bolts, leaning your weight in until the wax seated home. No leak, no rock. Set the bowl once and do not rock it to test. Lift it even an inch, and the wax is ruined and you start over. A $4 ring stopped sewage from rotting the floor out beneath the room. The fixture was sound. The seal beneath it had failed. He replaced the seal. Number 1, looking at the broken thing yourself before you ever reach for the phone. That is the whole list. Every repair from 25 down to 2 began the same way. A man, or just as often a woman, walked to the broken thing, knelt down, and looked. They put their hands on it. They worked the parts. They found what was loose, what had gone dry, what had worn away, and most of the time what they found was small. A loose screw, a dried seal, a gap that wanted filling. The fix took less time than the drive into town, but it asked one thing no catalog can ship to your door: the belief that you can understand what went wrong in your own home. Your grandfather carried that belief as his everyday state. Not because anyone trained him, because he had looked at broken things his whole life and made them right with his own 2 hands. And the doing of it had made him certain. That certainty cannot be bought at any price. It can only be built. Start looking. None of these repairs needed a license. None needed a power tool, a course, or any other man's permission. They needed only someone who paid attention to the place that kept him alive, who heard the drip and traced it back to the seat, who felt the gate sag and found the diagonal pulling it down, who saw the chinking crack and packed it before the snow came down the mountain. That attention was the whole inheritance of mountain life. Not the land, not money, but the quiet certainty that your hands could make a broken thing whole. We did not lose the tools. They are still in the shed, in the bottom of a toolbox no one has opened since the old man passed. We lost the voice that once stood beside us and said, "Watch me do it this one time, then you will know it for the rest of your life." That is what these 25 repairs were, not chores, a language the industry hoped you would forget, and the men who spoke it could walk into any broken room in those hills and leave it whole.